Hi everybody, my name is Trills and welcome back to another video in the Engaging with Art series. In this video, I'm going to be discussing one of my favorite topics personally when it comes to engaging with art and even in my own work and like producing work, and that's context. Context has always been really important to me, and I sort of consider myself like a context junkie, or at least just somebody who's very, very passionate about context. With my own work, that's true. Like I am constantly considering where is this work within the grander scheme of my work or the series that it's a part of, especially like the relation of the work to other pieces. At the same time, when it comes to my engagement with other art of different media, I am always really curious about context. I'm the type of person who really likes to know when an album was released if I'm listening to it. Likewise with film, like if I'm watching a movie, I always like to know when it was made. Something about my mind really likes to categorize and sort of like create a history of things. I think you could loosely define context as sort of a culmination of things and circumstances, both physical and abstract, that create the environment within which art is produced. I love that, and that's sort of the way that I think of it, at least. With this video, I want to look at different kinds of contexts and types, and as I go along, I'll sort of describe like my own experience too, and again, like what I feel in my own work in relation to these aspects. The first area I want to discuss is time, because that's usually, I think, the most grounded starting point whenever you're discussing context. For example, at the basic level, what year was a piece of art created? It's not always about the year art was released specifically or that date, but sometimes it's the years it was created, especially if we're discussing a piece of art that was created over several years, or sometimes I think in the case of like a decade or more. Considering the year and the time when a work was produced is so critical because it's that historical context. It's considering what was going on in the world that could have influenced this work or influenced the artist that was producing the work. You have to remember that there's only certain technology available at different times throughout history. Michelangelo, for example, wouldn't have been using computers to make art for obvious reasons. Now, if Michelangelo was alive during the 21st century, he may have used computers, and that would have produced much wildly different work. But that's what's so interesting. We have to consider the tools the artist had at the time. But going back to the era that an artist produces work, we have to consider what sort of trends or fads were happening. And I don't mean just in the art sense. I don't mean, say, like with film, what were the popular trends in film? I mean, what are the popular trends sort of in general? What does the mainstream culture look like within that period? Historical context can start to get really overwhelming, I think, and I think that's why I get excited about it, because there are so many different things we can consider. But what's important is to be asking yourself these things as you go along. I always try to just look at the date and look at the times and then sort of place it within my own understanding of history, or do like a little bit of light research and see what I can find when it comes to, like I said, world events or just major things happening in life, in humanity, that were possibly impacting the way an individual produces work. I'm producing this video in 2022, and as I think everybody watching this knows, the COVID-19 pandemic started in 2020, and I can say with a great deal of certainty that in, say, 50 to 100 plus years, when folks start looking back on artists who are producing work in this period, that pandemic and its implications and effects are going to be something that is considered when looking at the work that artists were producing, just because it's something, again, that happened during this time period that's going to influence and impact our lives and our creative processes. I know I'm throwing a lot at you already, and we are just discussing historical context, but bear with me, because I think more importantly than anything is that you gain a little bit and it gives you ideas of how to start thinking about this stuff. This is not meant to be something exhaustive, nor is it meant to be something refined even. It's about trying to share ideas that can get you thinking. The next sort of realm I want to discuss is a bit more specific, and that's the artist's life in general. I think there's a context of self that artists carry with them, and it's sort of unavoidable. These details, I think, center around things like the experience an artist has. Also considering the age of the artist at the production of a work. Well, is this a young artist who is somebody just starting out early in the career, or is this a very old artist, somebody who's produced a ton of work, and this is coming towards the later years of their lives? Between a young artist and an old artist, you are already going to have a great difference when it comes to life experience, simply on the fact that one has lived many more years than the other on the planet. And obviously, not all artwork is self-reflective. There are plenty of artists who produce work that is strictly commentary or is strictly regarding other things, but I would like to argue that I think it's nearly impossible for an artist's personal self and being to not seep its way into the artwork, at least in an indirect sense. I think there is always value when it comes to considering that aspect of context too. Moving on from there, another aspect of context to consider is environment. And I'm specifically now speaking of physical environment, so the place in which work was created. Now, this does connect with time because places in the world do change over time. And so that's sort of a twofold aspect you can look at. It's worth asking oneself when engaging with an artist's work or just an artist in general, what part of the world did this artist come from? What is their country of origin? And then likewise, what is the place they were producing work if it wasn't in that country of origin? I think it's worth looking at the living conditions of that particular environment. What were like the socio-economic factors that were influencing the area? Was it very high class? Was it very well established, or was it an impoverished area? What other peoples were habitating that area that surrounded the artist? Were there many different ethnic groups, or was it a fairly homogenized area where there wouldn't have been a lot of contact with other cultures? Things as simple as, was an artist producing in a big city or a rural countryside, and what big city, and during what period of time and of history? I think these sorts of things really impact an artist, and I will speak personally in the fact that I am deeply influenced by my environment. I feel as an artist that the ebb and flow of life around me just fuels me creatively. I don't currently live in an environment that is connected to an art community. I live in a middle-class suburban environment, and what's interesting about that is I actually find it in some ways very exciting and fueling because I just enjoy soaking in like that quotidien. I enjoy soaking in the daily life of this environment. Another aspect of environment to consider is who is surrounding the artist during the production of the work. And I mean specifically in an artist's circle. Is an artist surrounded by close family, close friends, or is it somebody who's more in isolation? Throughout history, I think we have so many good examples of how artists are influenced by their environments, truly. One example that comes to mind for me is Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a writer in the 1800s. And I think many will remember that he was famous for having spent time at Walden Pond, where he did a lot of his writings, and he was deeply influenced by the environment there. Now, again, that's one of many countless examples, but that just goes to show how deeply influenced artists can be by the environment that they were both brought up in, but then also where they are producing. The last area of context that I want to look at before we close today is, where is this particular artwork being produced in relation to an artist's overarching oeuvre? Is what you're viewing a piece within a series of other pieces? Is it a piece within a greater body of work? In some cases, is the piece you're viewing deliberately a one-off and not a part of any other body of work and just trying to be its own solitary thing? In that case, I think movies are a great example, right? Are you looking at a sequel or a prequel, or is this just its own standalone film? What sort of work was the artist creating before this piece? And what was the work created after, if we're looking at an artist retrospectively? As artists continue to work and grow and develop, they will hone their skills. I know with age, some artists will actually start to show some degradation, unfortunately, but for the most part, as you build these skills and tool sets, I think it's safe to say artists will continue to change and develop their process over time. That's another reason why considering the context of the work in relation to all of the other work an artist does is also very important. So the reason I speak on context today is because I think it's a major influence on art and the production of art. And as viewers, when we understand context, it helps us not only to place the work within the greater realm of history, but to understand what was affecting the artist and what could be influencing the artist from the outside and how that is reflected in the work. For me, I find that context truly enriches the experience that I have with the work because it helps me to more deeply understand, again, those influences in that world within which the work was produced. I'm somebody who believes that the time an artist was put on this planet, just like the time I am here now, is important and special, and that there's something to be gathered by the artist within the particular period that they exist. And likewise, there's something that the artist is offering to the particular period within which they exist. I believe that not just as artists, but as human beings, we touch and impact this world around us, that we don't just show up on the planet and just leave as a vapor, but instead that we leave an impression, we leave our fingerprints, our tactility, we leave something behind of us. It's sort of that give and take, right? Of receiving from this planet and this world and this time we're in, but then also leaving something behind. And this, I think, is really critical when we consider artwork. As you can tell, I could go on and on and on about context like all day. I just love it. And maybe in the future, I'm going to come back to this topic and go more specific or start using examples or details. For now, thank you so much for joining me. Please share this video with anybody else who might be interested in trying to engage with art more thoughtfully. And until next time, take care, everybody. Thank you.